Dave Talks Comics, Episode 69, Micronauts Special Edition, Issues 4 and 5. Welcome to Dave Talks Comics, a program on the subjects of comic books and cartoons. I talk about comic books I have read and cartoons I have watched. I talk from my notes. I don't go panel by panel or scene by scene. I try to do more than just summarize the stories. This program is not spoiler-free. I try not to spoil everything, but in the process of talking about these comic books and cartoons, I will probably spoil them in some way. On this episode, I will be talking about the 4th and 5th issues of Micronauts Special Edition. I talked about the first 3 episodes, the first 3 issues on 2 previous episodes. Those would be episodes 55 and 61 of Dave Talks Comics. Issue 4 of Micronauts Special Edition picks up right where issue 3 left off. It's the end of Chapter 8 of this 12-part story. This part is titled The Coming of Captain Universe. I'm not sure if that's what the first part was titled or not, but basically the previous installment ended with the battle between Captain Universe and Baron Karza starting. As you might remember, the Baron Karza had come through the Prometheus pit thanks to Professor Prometheus. He had merged with Professor Prometheus and was wreaking havoc at HAL, Human Engineering Life Laboratories. The Enigma Force had joined forces with Ray Coffin, who had endowed Ray Coffin with powers because he too, like Professor Prometheus, had fallen through the Prometheus pit, and he has come back through the Prometheus pit and attacks Baron Karza. Now, the Micronauts are also present at the Prometheus pit at Human Engineering Life Laboratories, although they don't join the battle. Instead, they take this opportunity to return home to the Microverse through the Prometheus pit. The battle is going okay. Captain Universe is doing decently. It's kind of a standstill, it seems. But then Baron Karza, seeing what's happened, seeing the Micronauts take off, breaks off. He had merged with Professor Prometheus, so he splits that up and he zooms back. It's kind of a spirit form of his. He zooms back through the Prometheus pit, chasing the Endeavor, the Micronaut ship. And then finally, at the end of this chapter, what you see is Steve Coffin, the kid who was the first human to encounter the Micronauts, reunited with his father, Ray Coffin, who had been Captain Universe for a time. The next issue, or the next chapter, is called Home is Where the Heart Is. And a good deal of this takes place on Spartak, which is the homeworld of Acroyear and the Acroyears. So it's a little confusing here because I'm not sure if it had been referred to this in this way before, but Acroyear, who is the ruler, the prince, or the king, I'm not sure if he's of the people of Spartak, is. So when the Micronauts arrive, because I said that they came back to the Microverse through the Prometheus pit. So when they arrive back in the Microverse, they are forced to land on Spartak by the other Acroyears. Now, Prince Acroyear had been forced from his planet. His brother Shaitan had taken over, had brainwashed the people of Spartak. But what he finds out when he gets back, because at first they're prepared for a fight, they're not sure what's going to happen, but they find out that the people are no longer brainwashed and the people welcome them, including his mate Cilicia, and that Shaitan is in chains. Shaitan, his brother, has been captured. And everything for a moment there seems good. They prepare a banquet to celebrate the fact that Prince Acroyear is back, and he's of course reunited with his mate Cilicia, and everything seems good for a time. Now you get a brief interlude here where you see what's actually going on Homeworld, where Slug and Force Commander, formerly known as Prince Argon, who is Marionette's brother, who was changed into a centaur by Baron Karza's scientists, are now leading the rebellion against Baron Karza. And you get a great splash page here where you see them in battle with the dog soldiers of Baron Karza. But then it's immediately after that, it's right back to Spartak. Now, Spartak, I should say something about it. It's kind of an interesting world. It's either not very big or it's got humongous mountains, because these mountains are very visible from space and they stick way up, and that's kind of interesting. And there's another thing that I'll get into in a little bit. The other thing that you did see, I forgot to mention, that you did see on Homeworld, is that you see the Shadow Priests stepping up to help out in the fight against Baron Karza's forces. Now, the reason why they're able to be as successful as they are is because Baron Karza has sent his forces after Commander Rann and the rest of the Micronauts on Spartak. And so they've got this banquet going, but that doesn't go very long, because all of a sudden they're under attack by the forces of Baron Karza. And so the Micronauts enter the fray, but except for Acroyear. Acroyear goes to, as Prince, he decides that he has to go to the best way for him to defend his world is to go to the Crystal Chamber and to commune with the world mind. Now, what you learn in this issue is that the Acroyears were not originally from Spartak. They originally came from another world. They were in search of a world, and Spartak was a planet without a people at the time, and it welcomed them in with the agreement that they would defend Spartak. And so Prince Acroyear goes into the Crystal Chamber, where he merges with the world mind. It's both a physical and a mental thing. You see the rock coming up. He takes off his armor for the first time. You see his skin, which is dark. You see him merging with the world mind. You see the stone covering up most of his body. Only his head and his chest and shoulders are exposed. His arms, his legs, his torso are all covered in rock as he is merging with the world mind, which is something that only he can do as the leader of the Acroyears. And you also get a brief, and there's going to be more in the next chapter, but you get a brief, at the very end of this issue, you get a brief history of the world mind, which is basically what I just told you about the Acroyears finding Spartak and making a bargain, a deal with the planet itself, with the world mind of the planet. And the other thing I wanted to say about this before moving on to the next chapter is that there's some evidence that Bill Mantlo definitely writes in some instances. You definitely get a little bit of his political opinions or social opinions, in that you definitely have some instances of feminism in this comic book, and I don't have a problem with that at all. But there's an instance where Bug, during the celebration before Baron Karza's forces attack, where Bug tries to basically lays hands on one of the female Acroyears, trying to get friendly with her in a way that was not invited, and he basically gets slammed against a wall, saying, "Don't do that again. You can't do that to me." And then when Baron Karza's forces attack, you get Commander Rann wants Marionette to stick next to him, and she's like, "No, I'm a valuable warrior. I can participate in this battle. I don't need to just stay with you." And she says, "I'll be more effective piloting a solo fighter, so that's what I'm going to do." Although you'll see later on that they do end up coming together, but that's because she's coming to his rescue. But I'll get into that. And the other thing that happens at the end of this issue is that you see Commander Rann get attacked by Baron, or he attacks Baron Karza. Baron Karza is like on this flying platform, and Commander Rann tries flying into it to attack Baron Karza, and there's a force field, and Commander Rand's spaceship just basically crunches, and so then he's unconscious, and Baron Karza has him, and then we get into the next issue, which is called Defeat. And this issue, it opens immediately where the previous issue ended. So Baron Karza has Commander Rann, and Marionette comes flying in to save him, and then Baron Karza basically captures her. He disables her ship. You see, it looks like Bug then is up there in this battle. That's kind of interesting because they're up in space, but they're not all of them wearing helmets. Bug certainly isn't. So it's unclear what the deal is with air and the atmosphere and that kind of thing. So Bug is attacking the ship, and then you see him get blown up. And so at this point, it looks like the Micronauts think that 3 of their members are dead. But they continue to fight on. You get a brief glimpse at Homeworld, where Force Commander, Prince Argon, the Centaur, and Slug continue to fight on. You see how they deal with some of the humans who they liberate. Well, some of the rich people who were members, and that's exactly how they're characterized in here as rich. How will they join them in the fight against Baron Karza? And they give them the option of it, and they don't. And then you see Slug basically mow them down, which is, I guess, another instance of feminism. It isn't Prince Argon who does this. It's Slug, and also a member of the leadership of the rebellion, who does this. And once again, at this point, you have the Shadow Priests side by side with the leaders of the rebellion. They are no longer standing aside. They are no longer standing in the shadows, I guess. They are actively taking part in this battle. But that's all you get of that fight for now. The rest of this issue is dedicated to the fight on Spartak. Baron Karza's forces continue to attack Spartak. They're led by Major Dark, and that's D''ARK. And his orders, which I think they come directly from Baron Karza, are to just basically wipe everybody out. And it gets pretty brutal in here. You see one of his soldiers about to gun down a baby that's crawling on the ground. You also see on the other side, because Prince Acroyear has merged with the world mind, he and Spartak, the planet itself, are taking part in the battle, and they are. You see the rocks shoot up from and pillars shoot up from the planet's surface to wipe out soldiers, to wipe out the ships of Baron Karza's forces. You destroy, and it all gets very bloody. At first, Prince Acroyear's mate Cilicia is running from Baron Karza's troops, but then she realizes, no, we have to stay, we have to fight, and her and Microtron take on a huge number of Baron Karza's forces in this great splash page towards the end of issue of this chapter. And then finally, it's the Acroyears are victorious. They beat the forces of Baron Karza's troops, and Major Dark has been taken prisoner, and he begs for mercy. And Lady Cilicia says, "Yes, I'll give you mercy," and then she cuts his throat. So more blood. So this is a pretty bloody issue. Now you don't. It's some of this is happening. I mean, you definitely see blood. But I mean, it's not as graphic as it could be. So Acroyear finally comes out of the chamber, the crystal chamber. He has the battle has been won, and that's the end of chapter 10 of this Micronauts story, and it's also the end of the 4th issue of Special Edition. You get a few bonus features. I think I'll talk about those after I talk about the rest of the story, though. So, finally, issue 5 of Micronauts Special Edition, which contains the last 2 chapters, chapters 11 and 12 of the Micronauts story, as written by Bill Mantlo and drawn by Michael Golden. And for the most part, inked by Al Milgrom. There was one issue that was inked by Bob McLeod, which I liked very much, and that was actually chapter 8, which was continued in the beginning of issue 4 of Micronauts Special Edition, but it was just that chapter, and so we're back to Al Milgrom's inks after that for chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12, which I think is a little unfortunate because I did like Bob McLeod's inks a little more. So chapter 11, which is called The Enigma Force, or We Are the Enigma Force. It's a little unclear to me. Yeah, I guess the Enigma Force, or Enigma Force, is the title of this chapter. So Marionette and Commander Rann have been captured by Baron Karza, and they are unable to do anything. But Baron Karza has returned to Homeworld with them. He wants to get the information about the Enigma Force from Commander Rann. He realizes he is the key to learning about the Enigma Force. Well, Commander Rann and Marionette can't do anything. They're basically in chains. Well, they're not in chains, but they're being bound by Baron Karza's, I don't know if it's magic or if it's science, but he has them in some sort of bonds, some sort of fiery bonds. So Force Commander decides to attack, and Force Commander attacks with some help from the Shadow Priest. So Baron Karza, because he's fighting somebody who's in his Centaur form, also transforms into his Centaur form and attacks. So you get this Centaur on Centaur attack. And Slug wants to take part in the battle. She tries to, but she wants to shoot Baron Karza, but she's afraid she's going to hit Force Commander, so she doesn't. And in the end, Force Commander is defeated by Baron Karza, although he doesn't kill him. Now, at this point, the Shadow Priests step up, and they free Marionette and Commander Rann, and then they take off their robes, and you see that they all look exactly like Commander Rann. Which is kind of cool, and what you basically, what they say is a man may have many selves, become many things in the course of a lifetime, and so these are like all the previous selves of Commander Rann, or that's kind of what they say here, and in his more than 1,000 years, Actarus Rann has lived many lifetimes. Thus he has become many things. And so then Commander Rann becomes infused with the Enigma Force and takes on Baron Karza. And at first Karza is still in his Centaur form, and then he is transformed back into his by him unwillingly, he is transformed back into his humanoid form, which of course looks a little like Darth Vader to my eyes, probably a lot of people's. And you get a little bit of history here. You see his parents, Commander Rann's parents, Dallin and Sepsis, and they rehash a little bit of that. And then just as it looks like Commander Rann is about to win, Baron Karza tries to call on to summon the power of the pit, and I assume this is the same pit that led to Earth. But his spirit, you see his spirit leave his body falls apart, and basically it looks like the battle is won. And that's basically, and then the Enigma Force leaves Commander Rann. And that's basically where this chapter ends. There's a lot of expository talk in this, and something I meant to start with, but that I should really say here, is this is not what do you call it, decompressed storytelling at all. There is just so much packed into this. This is a story which really bears rereading. It's a story that really, you really do, you can't pick it all up on one read through. There's just so much going on. There's so many little things. Bill Mantlow's done a great job with this, but at the same time, it probably would benefit a little bit from being spread out a little more, but this is the way the story is told, and so that's something that as I go back through this, I mean, because I originally read this weeks or maybe a couple months ago, as I read back through this, I'm picking up on things that I didn't see before or which I have no recollection of seeing before. But anyhow, one more chapter to go. That's called To the Victors Belongs a World, although on the cover of that issue, it is called Blood Feud, and we'll get into why. So the first part, because the story is basically divided in two, and so the first part is basically the victory celebration, that Baron Karza is dead and gone. Not really, and I'll get into that later. But the Micronauts have won, and Prince Argon, Commander Rann, Marionette, Slug, Acroyear, Biotron, Microtron, Cilicia are all there for a celebration. Commander Rann's in kind of bad shape. But then you also, so that's the first few pages of this chapter. Then what you get is a Meanwhile Back on Earth, two pages on that. And you get some foreshadowing, I think, of things to come, and also a little bit of wrap-up on other things. The foreshadowing is Colonel Macy, who was the commander of the forces at Human and Engineering Life Laboratories. You see him finding a tube that contains one of Prince Shaitan, Acroyear's brother's forces, who was killed in the battle. One of Shaitan's troops that was killed in the battle, who's in a tube that presumably, I believe, Professor Prometheus was going to do something with, and that you see that getting sent off. Well, then you see scenes of S.H.I.E.L.D., and S.H.I.E.L.D. is sending somebody named Agent M, and I have no idea who this is, and I was unable to find anything out about him. He doesn't look all that familiar. But you see Nick Fury and Dum Dum Dugan in shadows sending Agent M down to Human Engineering Life Laboratories to pick up this test tube, or this tube which contains this miniature, or this tiny warrior, this tiny dead warrior. And you get a little bit of scenes, and that's foreshadowing of something to come, which will be revealed in a forthcoming issue, although Nick Fury does show up, from what I'm able to tell, in the next issue of Micronauts. It isn't until issue 26, 27, 28, 29, it looks like, that they finally follow up on this what they're hinting at right here, which is that S.H.I.E.L.D. is somehow going to get involved. And actually, let me hold off on saying anything else about that, but I will say a little more about that in a minute. So the rest of this issue is devoted to what the events on Spartak, because Prince Acroyear and Lady Cilicia have returned to Spartak to deal with Acroyear's brother, who was a traitor to his people, who served Baron Karza, who brainwashed his people. And, of course, Acroyear, at the beginning of this whole story, back in Chapter 1, was in prison, was going to be executed, or I think they were going to have to take part in some gladiatorial games, where the intention was for him to die. So he wants to banish his brother, but instead he gives his brother the option of fighting him. Or I believe that's how it's. But so he fights with his brother, and basically it's one of these instances where he ends up killing his brother inadvertently, where his brother. His sword is Acroyear's sword is out. His brother comes charging at him, and he doesn't mean to kill him, but he does. And then in the final page of Chapter 12, you finally see what happened to Bug. He's not dead, but somehow he winds up back on his homeworld of Caliclac, and presumably at some point he's going to meet up with the Micronauts once again. So let me look at my notes, see if there's anything else that... Oh, well, the other thing is you do get a little more history of the Acroyears, and you get a little more detail about them, about how they were originally a peaceful people, but they made a deal with the planet of Spartak. And there's this one funny panel where I didn't notice this the first time I read this, but I just noticed this now, where you see the planet Spartak, like it's kind of got part of a face, like you can see kind of a nose and these two eyes, and that's kind of funny because you don't see that anywhere else, or I don't remember seeing that anywhere else in this story. But you learn about their deal with the Acroyears' deal with the planet Spartak, and how they were originally a farming people. They were peaceful people, but they made this deal with the planet, and so they had to become warriors to defend the planet. And how Shaitan has broken that promise, and that's the whole context in which you get this additional history of the planet Spartak and of the Acroyears. The rest of this issue is extras. You get two things that come from other issues of the Micronauts. The first comes from issue 23, and it's inside the homeworld microship Endeavor. And you get a little more information about the ship. Honestly, I don't think that there was very much in the way... There were scenes that took place inside the ship, but they really didn't give you much of an idea of the innards of the ship throughout this 12-part story. So this gives you a little more information, although I think there was also some in issue 3 of the special edition. You also get a 2, 3, 4, 5-part, 6 pages on the origin of Baron Karza, which comes from issue 25 of Micronauts. Now that is foreshadowing also, because Baron Karza returns in issue 26, which is also the issue where S.H.I.E.L.D. gets involved for a few issues. Which means obviously the battle must be taking place on Earth. So the Micronauts will be returning to Earth. You get there's a couple of text pieces also here on in issue 4 of not of Micronauts, but of Micronauts Special Edition. There's a piece called The Enigma of the Enigma Force, where Bill Mantlo, these are both written by Bill Mantlo, where Bill Mantlo is talking about, it's basically a sales pitch for the Micronauts, but he's talking about the Enigma Force, and he says, we can discuss it, but we cannot explain it. We can deduce its existence from its outward manifestations, but we cannot subject it to analysis. It merely is. And then towards the end of this, he says, Karza was defeated the first time, but evil has its way of resurrecting itself, and good must ever be on its guard against it. That is the basic premise of the Enigma Force. That is the theory behind the Micronauts. And that's the first article There was a few other extras in that first issue, or that fourth issue of Micronauts Special Edition. Let's see, let me flip through this. You, of course, got the covers to the issues, to chapters 8, 9, and 10. There was a Mighty Marvel bonus poster of Time Traveler by Michael Golden, I believe. I'm not sure where this first appeared, if it was just for this, or if it had appeared somewhere else. You get another house ad for Beauty and the Beast, which was this Dazzler Beast miniseries, which I have not read, written by Ann Nesenti. And you also get ads for Super Boxers by Ron Wilson, another one which was a graphic novel that I've never read, although I see it always at conventions. And also an ad for the Doctor Strange graphic novel by J.M. DeMatteis and Dan Green. It says coming in 1984. I'm not too familiar with that one. It doesn't have a title. It just says the Doctor Strange graphic novel. I've already talked about some of the extras in Special Edition issue 5. You also get the other text piece. The text piece in this one is called The Evolution of the Micronauts. And he talks a little bit more about how to write the series and some of the challenges, and because it was a toy line, the Mego, the company that made the toys, wanted them to have stories that were on Earth with little kids, and which wasn't what Bill Mantlo wanted to write. And he also talks about how one of the best things that happened was that the toy line was unsuccessful, and that freed them from these constraints and oversight by the toy company. And it was right about the time that this was that Micronauts Special Edition was coming out in 1984, that they were getting to relaunch the Micronauts series as a comic book that would... Well, actually, hold on. Let me make sure of this. But the Special Voyages, I think they call it, Micronauts Special Voyages. And that's about it as far as extras go. I already talked about the pieces from issues 23 and 25 of Micronauts. There's a house ad for Marvel Superhero Secret Wars. Not one of my favorite stories. Not awful, but not one of my favorites. And I think that's about it. So this was the last issue that Michael Golden drew. He continued to do covers for the next 12 issues, but this was the last issue that he penciled. The next penciler for the next 6 issues was Howard Chaykin, and then after that, Pat Broderick took over. I'm not sure how much longer he did it for. I believe Jackson Geiss became the penciler at some point. So that's it for Micronauts, the first big story arc of Micronauts, which lasted for 12 chapters. I had never read it before. Definitely worth reading, or at least I felt it was. Like I said, there's a lot in here. There's a lot that's going on. It can get a little confusing at times. It's easy to lose sight of some of the things because there's so much packed into these issues and packed into these panels. There's all these little nuggets, and as always, some comic books are just more dense than others, in that they have more material in them, and that you really have to read them carefully, and sometimes even reread them to get everything that's going on. That's definitely a case with at least these 12 issues of Micronauts. And really, this is the end of what I've read of Micronauts. I did read the Micronauts X-Men miniseries back in the day. I don't think I have all those. I have a couple of those issues, I think, but I don't have all of them. Not sure if I'm going to reread that anytime soon or not. So that's it for Micronauts Special Edition. which is a reprint of the first 12 issues of the original Micronauts series from 1979, I believe is when it began. And like I said, I really enjoyed it. I think it's worth a read if you like that kind of stuff, if you like science fiction adventures, especially the 1970s variety, which took place in that post-Star Wars era, about the same time that Star Wars was coming out, Battlestar Galactica, the original incarnation of Battlestar Galactica, and I'm trying to think if there was any other big space franchises out about that. I'm probably forgetting something. Certainly Star Trek had predated it, and the Star Trek movies had just begun around that time. But anyhow, that's it for Micronauts. I think it's worth pointing out one more thing about the Micronauts story, specifically something that crops up in this third part, in issues 4 and 5 of Micronauts Special Edition. I think it pops up in issue 8, or chapter 8, and that is that you finally get to see what Prince Acroyear looks like under his armor, and you see that he is dark-skinned. And I think that's important because there was a definite lack of diversity in comics in this time. This was the late 1970s when this came out. Some changes had been made. There were a few characters of color in comic books, African American characters. Specifically, I'm thinking of Storm, I'm thinking of Luke Cage, I'm thinking of Black Panther. Although there aren't any others that come. I'm sure there were some villains that came to that. If I dug a little bit, I could find some. But I think those are the only. But even most of the villains, for that matter, were usually white, or sometimes they were Asian. Although, well, I think at this point they were not being drawn in an offensive way, but you still had a definite lack of characters of color, and so I think it's important. I think it's significant that Bill Mantlo decided to make that. Bill Mantlo, and I assume to some degree Michael Golden must have had something to do in this. If nothing else, he drew it. Had some in deciding to make this character Acroyear dark-skinned, and I think that's significant. And I think it's also significant because it's not his defining characteristic, as you would sometimes find in stories where it seems like if a character's African American, that it all has every plot point that involves him has to revolve around the fact that he is African American and how that impacts him. And that's not the case here. After all, his lineage is not, his skin color is not revealed until you're 8 chapters into this story. But I think it's worth noting, in the same way that I thought it was worth noting the instances where Bill Mantlo, where the story specifically addressed issues of women's rights. And I mentioned those earlier in this episode. That's it for episode 69 of Dave Talks Comics. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the web at davetalkscomics.com and facebook.com/davetalkscomics. Email can be sent to davetalkscomics@gmail.com. Next time on Dave Talks Comics, I will be talking about the last 4 episodes of Season 2 of Justice League Unlimited. I'm Dave. Thank you for listening.